This experience I'm going to describe has taken a while for me to get together and actually write down. It takes place in Yosemite National Park in August of 2017 with my two best friends, Zach and Andrew. Zach had worked that summer as a parking agent at Glacier Point and was pretty familiar with the area. His employee housing, he was given a house in Wawona with two other guys. Andrew and I were visiting for the week and had each been to Yosemite before. One of the nights there, we decided to watch the sun set over Chilnuwana Falls. It was a great hike that Zach had done before. The trail was about 4 miles to the top with about a 2,000-foot elevation gain. We brought food and decided to hike up and take a swim in each of the pools on top of the falls. We set out on a couple of hours before sunset. As we approached the top portion, we were about half a mile to the top of the falls where a guy, about our age, early 20s, ran up to us from bushes, frantically asking for help. His friend had fallen 50 feet off of a cliff and had shattered his femur. Zach was used to this, and after working in the park all summer, he had seen many injuries and was used to it. The man didn't have cell reception, but I did, so I called 911 and reported the accident, requesting search and rescue. After a few minutes, we decided that we wanted to continue the hike after search and rescue assured us that they would be there soon with a helicopter. We told the guy that help was on its way, and we continued the next half mile up to the top of the falls. When we got up there, it was a picture-perfect scene, a beautiful sunset as we swam and ate. We then got an amazing show as we saw the helicopter land to pick up the injured guy that we had just encountered right below us. I'm a private pilot and Air Force aviator, so I loved every second of watching the helicopter land on the mountainside. After the sunset, we began the hike down and passed the spot with the injured guy, and search and rescue was taking care of him. We had a brief encounter with them. They thanked us for calling it in, and it was now dark out and we continued the hike down. There wasn't much moonlight and it was pretty dark, so we used our phones as flashlights to see the trail. And this is where the story gets interesting. The top of the hike was switchbacks with a steep incline on the right and a steep decline on the left with shrubs and trees. It was definitely too steep to hike down, hence the switchbacks. And about 1 mile into the hike, Zach was in front with a light and I was second, also shining my light, and Andrew was in the back. Zach was shining his light ahead and saw something sticking out from behind a tree that was about 15 feet ahead, just off to the right of the path, and instinctively shined his light on it. That's when whatever it was revealed itself from behind the tree and ran across the path, down to the left and down the steep grade. It ran on 2 feet and resembled some sort of humanoid figure. It was a little shorter than us and clearly had 2 arms and 2 legs, but it moved in an inhuman way. It vaguely resembled a person with a head and limbs, but appeared to be just skin, no clothes at all. All 3 of us saw it and we froze in our tracks. We continued shining the light where it had run, down the left side of the mountain, but we didn't see anything after it disappeared. We were absolutely terrified, none of us really knowing what to say because we had no idea what we had just witnessed. The worst part was that we still had another 3-mile hike ahead of us, plus another 1.5 miles from the trailhead to Zach's house, all while knowing that this creature could be stalking us close by. Luckily, we made it to his house, terrified and exhausted, but unharmed. Whatever it was must have been just as scared of us as we were of it. My question is, has anyone else had a similar experience in that area? I've done some research and my best guess would be a skinwalker, but it didn't try to lure us into the forest with it. We had another strange experience a couple of years later in Tioga Pass, right outside the Tioga gate of the park. We were camping in a closed campground in that area, and in the middle of the night, I woke up to go to the bathroom, and before exiting the tent, I saw an orb about 5 feet away, floating by with a bright light. I don't think it was a person because Zach, Andrew, and I all saw the orb, and there wasn't anyone around us. Our friend Jackson, who was also in the tent, told us that the next morning that he had felt rocks being thrown at the tent all night, along with hearing footsteps nearby. Has anyone else ever had these similar strange experiences? I'd love to hear them. We all know what we saw, and we know that it wasn't human. In October 2017, I lost my husband while I was 7 weeks pregnant. And the day he died, I left for work in a hurry. We exchanged some texts after he woke up, discussing a phone interview that he had later that day and the pain that he was experiencing in his leg. We had a quick phone call a couple of hours later where he mentioned that he was running to the pharmacy for pain meds. About an hour after that, I tried calling him several times to make sure that he got home safely, but there was no answer, which was very unlike him. I kept calling him for hours until, finally, a woman answered his phone, and she told me that she was with the sheriff's department and asked me to come home. At the time, I worked in a prison, and fearing that he might have gotten into some sort of trouble, I left my post, got to my car, and sped through the 30-minute drive back to town. As I turned into our parking garage, I saw a large white van that read, "Coroner." When I approached our home, I was greeted by the same woman who had spoken to me on the phone, blocking my view into the house. She informed me that my husband had suffered a heart attack, later confirmed as a pulmonary embolism, which explained the leg pain that he had mentioned earlier that morning. Apparently, my husband made it home, locked the security door, and then collapsed. He screamed for help. Our neighbor and her son had heard him and rushed over, but they couldn't get inside because all the doors and windows were locked. The son later apologized for not breaking a window, saying that in his shock and panic he lost all sense of reason. They spoke to my husband through the door while they called 911, but he stopped responding just moments before help arrived, and he was pronounced dead on arrival. A week or so after his service, his best friend's wife offered me a cleansing and a card reading by her mother. And although I was skeptical, I was desperate for any kind of communication with him or closure. And during the reading, she mentioned many interesting things, but what stood out the most was that my husband was in a stage after death where the soul relives its entire life, similar to when people say that their life flashes before their eyes. She explained that this is a place every soul visits after death, as a way to reflect on the life they lived. She also said his death was so sudden that he hadn't yet realized that he had died, and that I would need to help him cross over. She felt strongly that I was the one who could help him and instructed me to light white candles and place a jar of water to guide him to peace. Now, a few months later, I moved into my parents' house. One day, while lying on the couch, I suddenly felt a heavy sensation, almost as if I had been administered anesthesia. It felt like sleep paralysis. When I could finally open my eyes, I was still on the couch in my parents' living room, but my husband was sitting on a chair right in front of me, as clear and as real as he had been before he died. Before I could even speak, he started talking. He told me that he was nervous about his upcoming phone interview, the one that he had the day he passed. He said he was excited and hopeful about getting the job and asked for help preparing. I looked at him with tears in my eyes, feeling the weight of what I had to say. I told him, "Baby, I'm so sorry. Do you remember the pain in your leg? You had blood clots. One of them made its way to your heart. You aren't going to make it to the interview, baby. You died." I'll never forget the look on his face. First confusion, then the slow realization of what I had just told him. I apologized again, told him I loved him, and begged him to respond, but he just sat there with that strange expression. And suddenly, I woke up. The chair from my parents' kitchen table was now sitting directly in front of me, empty. I never dreamed of him again after that, and I pray it's because I gave him the closure that he needed to cross over. We now have a 5-year-old son who often dreams very specific dreams about his father. He talks about things that he couldn't possibly know unless it came directly from him. Losing my husband was my first real experience with death, but it brought me peace to have my own confirmation that there is something more after this life. When I was 10, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. My father inherited an old house in remote New South Wales from a distant relative we barely knew. He thought it would be an idyllic place to raise a family, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. Little did he know what awaited us. The house was nestled in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense bushland. It was the perfect picture of tranquility, at least during the day. The house itself had an eerie, antiquated charm, with creaking floorboards and dimly lit hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. My family consisted of my father, my mother, my older sister Lucy, and me. We moved in with excitement and a sense of adventure, unaware of the horrors that would soon unfold. The first few nights were pretty uneventful. My father busied himself with repairs, my mother unpacked, and Lucy and I explored the property. On the fourth night, I had my first encounter. I was in my room, reading a book, when I felt a sudden chill. The room seemed darker than usual, and I had the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I looked up, and there, peering around the corner of the door frame, was a figure. It was barely visible, like a shadow, but I could make out the shape of a head and shoulders. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and the figure remained there for a few agonizing moments before disappearing. I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, despite the creeping fear that settled in my bones. Weeks passed and odd things continued to happen, mostly to me. My toys would be moved around and my bed would occasionally shake in the middle of the night. I told my parents, but they dismissed it as nightmares or childish imagination. One night I woke up to a whispering voice hissing my name. I sat up, drenched in sweat, and saw the same figure from before, now at the foot of my bed. It was closer and clearer. It had no features, just an inky blackness. I screamed and my mother rushed in, and the figure vanished the moment she opened the door, leaving her to comfort me and dismiss it as a bad dream. It wasn't until Lucy had her own experience that my parents began to take things seriously. She came to me one morning, pale and shaken, saying that she'd seen a woman in old-fashioned clothes standing at the foot of her bed, staring at her with hollow eyes. My parents started to believe something was off, but didn't want to admit that something supernatural might be happening. Our situation escalated over the 5 years that we lived there. It started out small, lights flickering, strange noises, and cold drafts, but grew increasingly malicious. 2 experiences stand out vividly in my memory from what I recall. The first happened during our 2nd year. My father had gone into town, leaving the rest of us alone, and it was a stormy night and the house seemed alive with almost its own energy. Lucy and I were in the living room trying to watch TV despite the frequent power flickers, and suddenly, the room went ice cold and the TV turned off entirely. In the next moment, the corner of the room darkened and we both saw it. An unmistakable figure peering out from the shadows, its eyes reflecting the dim light. It slowly moved closer and we could make out the shape of its mouth, twisted into a very cruel smile. Lucy grabbed my hand and we bolted upstairs to my parents' room, locking the door behind us. My mother tried to calm us down, but she too felt the coldness and unease that permeated the house. Another terrifying event occurred in our 4th year. My father had become more open to the idea that something was clearly wrong. He brought in a local priest to bless the house after numerous pleas from my mother, and that night, after the blessing, I was in the kitchen getting a drink of water when I felt a presence behind me. I turned and saw the same figure that had haunted me for years, now clearer than ever. It was a man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with one side of his face hideously scarred. He stood at the entrance of the kitchen, blocking my exit, and I was paralyzed with fear. He began to move towards me, slowly, deliberately, and every step he took seemed to drain the warmth from the room. I fell to the floor, unable to move, only managing to scream when he was inches away. My father burst in and the figure vanished, leaving the air thick with dread. The priest's blessing had stirred whatever malevolence resided there. In our final year, things became unbearable. The entire family started hearing voices, footsteps, and seeing the figure, now bolder and more frequent in its appearances. It seemed to thrive on our fear, growing stronger and more aggressive. Doors would slam, objects would fly across the room, and we all felt watched all the time, and we decided enough was enough. One evening, as we packed our things to leave, the activity reached a fever pitch. The house shook, the temperature dropped to freezing, and all of us saw shadows darting around. It seemed the entity didn't want us to go, but we were very resolute in our decision. We moved out the next day, leaving behind that cursed house and never looking back. Later on, we learned that the house had a very dark history. The man who built it in the 1800s was rumored to have gone mad and taken the lives of his family. His spirit, along with others, was said to haunt the property, reliving their final moments in a twisted loop of torment. Living in that house changed us all. We never spoke of it much after we left, but the memories lingered. And even now, years later, sometimes I wake up in the dead of night, half expecting to see a face peering around the corner, watching and waiting. I was at a family friend's wedding today, which took place in the middle of a forest. It was a beautiful setting, but after a while, I needed a break from the crowd, so I walked toward a small stream nearby. And that's when I saw someone. Now, a little background. Last year, one of my closest friends passed away in a car crash. We were both into paranormal stuff, and they promised that they'd come to find me after they died. Since their passing, I haven't noticed anything unusual, aside from occasionally seeing a shadow figure, until today. The person standing by the stream had a birthmark on their face, and my friend had the exact same birthmark. They were wearing a limited edition shirt from a band that we both loved, the same shirt my friend wore the day they crashed. Even their hair color was identical to my friend's. I stared at this person for a while, and they smiled back, saying, "Hello," and they said my name. And I blinked, and they were gone. And I'm still just so confused and even terrified at what happened. It does give me a sense of peace, but I just need some reassurance that I'm not losing my mind. My girlfriend and I moved into a new apartment roughly 3 years ago. Since then, she has been suffering from weekly episodes of sleep paralysis. Her brother used to have them when they were children, so she recognized what it was right away. She has described it as being completely paralyzed, except for being able to breathe and move her eyes. Most of the time, she sees a dark, tall figure moving around our apartment during these episodes. Sometimes she just hears it walking. Other times it's standing in the doorway staring at her, and occasionally it presses down on her chest, making it hard for her to breathe. She's a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal, yet these sleep paralysis episodes terrify her. And now, here's the really scary part. She usually manages to wake me up during these episodes by breathing quickly and loudly. I can then wake her from it, which allows her to move again, and the figure disappears. What I haven't told her is that for the past 2 months, I've seen this figure too. Right after I'm woken up by her breathing, I can see it, bent over her, pressing down on her chest. It always disappears the moment I acknowledge it or try to wake her. I've also seen it standing in the hallway, staring at me one night while I was home alone watching a movie. I pretended not to see it, and when I looked again, it was gone. Now comes the dilemma. Do I tell my girlfriend that her sleep paralysis demon might not just be a product of her mind, since I've seen it too, and at the same time as her when I wake her up from paralysis at night? I don't want to scare her. She's already terrified by the sleep paralysis, but at least she believes it's all in her head, and we can't afford to move. I think we can both live with this as long as I never tell her the truth, but I need your advice. I was confined to a hospital in Manila for severe pneumonia back in 2021 during the pandemic lockdown when masks were mandatory. I was about to be assigned a room when I saw a toddler in a red polka dot dress galloping around the emergency room and then leaving through the glass entrance. She wasn't wearing a mask, so I asked security if children were allowed, and the guard replied in Filipino, "No children allowed." And I was confused. Wasn't he seeing this rowdy kid? After I was confined to the 5th floor, I fell asleep and had a really weird dream. I went down and saw the young girl outside the emergency room, only this time she was weeping in anger and holding a hammer. And when she looked up, she screamed, "Pa, why did you leave me?" Afraid of being hit with the hammer, I ran up the dim stairwell back to the 5th floor. All I remember was that I was slowly losing my breath, and when I looked back, I saw her chasing after me, only now she was floating up the staircase. It felt like I ascended over 20 floors because the chase seemed never-ending. The stairwell echoed with a pleading voice screaming, "Pa!" By the time I reached my bed, I was physically out of breath, and that's when I woke up with dangerously low oxygen levels, gasping for air, already surrounded by 2 attending nurses. I was intubated for a few days after that. When I regained consciousness, I recounted my dream to my attending nurse. She froze in shock before asking, "Did she have a polka dot dress on?" And I asked her how she knew. Apparently my dream was eerily similar to over 10 anecdotes from different patients over the decades, each one involving a girl in a polka dot dress who first appeared in the emergency area and then later in their dreams, chasing them until they woke up. The existence of this girl has been an open secret among the hospital staff, passed down from worker to worker since the 1970s, and I guess the backstory goes, more than 40 years ago, a small dengue-infected child was brought to the hospital by a young Chinese father in his 20s, and for reasons unknown, perhaps because she was an illegitimate child not recognized by the father's family, the dad abandoned her at the hospital, never to return. And the hospital recorded no proper identity for the little girl, and she eventually died alone. She was buried in the cemetery right across from the hospital, and a group of nurses helped bury the girl. They named her Shobe, a Chinese-Filipino term for youngest daughter. She wore a polka dot dress. The nurse told me that while they have never actually seen the ghost, they all know of her existence. They also know that the ghost only reveals herself to certain people. Strangely, all the patients who reported seeing her shared similar physical attributes, East Asian looking, i.e. Chinese, in their 20s, of average build, around 5'8", and on the brink of death. Perhaps patients who resembled her father. Did I remind her of him? I've come to believe the ghost of this girl is still searching for her father. I won't deny it. It felt like I was running from death itself, but in hindsight, I wonder if the girl simply wanted a father. Maybe she wanted to bring one with her to the afterlife. By some miracle, I survived the whole ordeal, and I returned to that hospital last year for a routine checkup, but I never saw that girl again. Call it a blessing or a curse, but for what it's worth, that dream woke me up to a second chance at life. And I hope you find peace wherever you are, little girl. Finding a rental in suburban Victoria that was actually affordable seemed like a miracle. My 2 housemates and I, all in our early 20s and juggling part-time jobs with university, couldn't believe our luck when we found a charming house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was suspiciously cheap for the area, but we chalked it up to our good fortune and a landlord eager to fill the place quickly. We moved in during an unusually warm summer. The house had a dated but cozy feel with worn carpets and faintly creaking floorboards that we wrote off as part of its charm. It wasn't long before we started to notice some oddities. The first night, while we were unpacking in the living room, we heard footsteps running up and down the hallway. We dismissed it as the house settling, maybe some old pipes, but the footsteps continued every night, always around the same time, 2 a.m. My room was at the end of the hallway, so I was often the last to hear the footsteps before they faded away. One night, I decided to stay up and see if I could catch whatever or whoever was causing the noise. I sat in the living room, lights off, with only the glow from my laptop for company. And right on cue, the footsteps started. Light, rapid steps, unmistakably human, yet not matching anyone's presence. As they approached the living room, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air grew cold, and the footsteps stopped just short of the doorway where I was sitting. I looked up, but there was nothing there, just darkness and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Now, we laughed it off the next day, but a sense of unease definitely lingered. And then came the touches. It started with Claire, one of my housemates. She'd been studying at the kitchen table and would suddenly feel a light brush against her shoulder, like someone lightly running their fingers over her to get her attention. She'd whip around, expecting to see one of us, but the room would be empty. And over time, Sam and I experienced the same cold, fleeting touches, ever so gentle but profoundly unsettling. The real terror, though, began with the sightings. One evening, while we were all relaxing in the living room, I noticed a shadowy figure peering in through the window. I jumped up, thinking someone was trying to break in, but as I moved closer, the figure seemed to melt away into the night. Sam saw it too, confirming I wasn't just seeing things, and from that point on, the figure haunted us, watching us from the windows, always just at the edge of our vision, disappearing whenever we tried to confront it. The worst night of our lives in that house started just like any other. We had gathered in the kitchen for a late dinner. Plates and cutlery clattered as we joked about the house being haunted, nervously laughing off our fear. It was around midnight when things started to take a turn. As we sat eating, the temperature in the room plummeted. Our breath became visible, hanging in the air like smoke. The kitchen light flickered, casting erratic shadows all around us. And then, without warning, the cupboard doors flew open and plates began to hurl themselves off the shelves. We stared in shock as they shattered against the walls and floors, and amid the chaos, a high-pitched, blood-curdling shriek filled the air, echoing throughout the house. It wasn't just a noise. It was a tormenting sound, like something from the depths of a nightmare. We bolted from the kitchen, only to find the hallway blocked by that same shadowy figure. It loomed larger than ever, a dark mass with indistinct features but a very real presence, and the air felt thick, almost tangible, with hatred and malice radiating from it like a feeling. We hesitated for what felt like an eternity, then bolted for the back door, leaving behind everything but our need to escape. We never spent another night in that house. We called the landlord the next morning demanding an immediate termination of our lease, and surprisingly, or perhaps not, they didn't argue with us. We managed to find temporary accommodation with friends and eventually secured a new place far away from that cul-de-sac and any lingering spirits. Only later did we find out that that house had a very dark history to it. Previous tenants had left suddenly, some claiming that the place was haunted, others describing experiences similar to ours. It wasn't something the landlord ever mentioned, and perhaps it wasn't something they believed or even wanted to believe. But living there changed us. We grew quieter, more introspective, and I find myself glancing over my shoulder a lot more, half expecting to see a shadow peering back at me even in the safety of my new home. Some nights, especially when it's quiet and the house is settling, I swear I can still hear those footsteps. A few years ago, my mother passed away after a long battle with cancer. In her final weeks, she was bedridden at home and at one point on some heavy pain medication. The whole family took turns helping and spending time with her, and what she told us towards the end gave us all a shock. She kept reacting as though something had scared her, and she would jump and say, "Oh God," or She'd swear as if something startled her. At first, she didn't say anything, but then, after a week or two, she blurted out something one day that gave us all the creeps. "I wish he'd stop scaring me. Tell him to go away." She was irritated by something, or more precisely, someone. Confused, we asked what the problem was, and she told us. Apparently, during her final weeks, she kept seeing her deceased partner walking around the house. He'd walk down the hallway, past her bedroom door, or sometimes sit in her room. And every time it happened, it would make her jump with fright, as she obviously wasn't expecting to see him there. She seemed more annoyed than scared, and she saw him several times a day just going about his business as if he had never left. Usually her reaction was, "Oh, for God's sake, go away." Not because she didn't want to see him, but because he kept startling her. And our first thought was that it was related to the pain medication that she was on, but the nurse assured us that it wouldn't cause hallucinations or visions. I know it scared the life out of us, and she entered a hospice a few weeks later and the visions stopped. Weird, right? We still don't talk about it. That's just how unsettled we all really were. Let's get one thing straight. I've hiked the Blue Mountains before, but nothing, I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what I experienced during what was supposed to be a routine trek through its canyons. It began as a clear morning, the kind Aussies brag about. The eucalypt haze that gives the Blue Mountains their name wrapped around the cliffs in a dreamy shroud. I set off from Katoomba, pumped for a day of solitude and the haunting beauty of the Groves Valley. Honestly, I should have turned back when I first felt that tingle in my neck, the one you get when you think someone's watching you. Being the dauntless bloke that I pretend to be, I chalked it up to the chill of the mountain air. Bad call. I missed the trail marker, my mind set on the shifting shadows between the gum trees, and that's when I got lost. The paths here wind around and double back like a snake. I've trekked them plenty, but today they had teeth, and they bit me hard. Hours passed, and I realized that I was properly stuffed. Night fell like a curtain, fast and unforgiving, and I've never known dark like that, not the city kind. This was a velvety, pressing darkness that oozed into your bones and stayed there. My phone's flashlight cut through it like a weak whisper against a thunderstorm. Every tree looked like a gnarled hand, and every bush rustle felt like a warning. And here's the goosebump bit. I wasn't alone. Not once did I see it clearly, but by the twitch of twilight, there was something behind me, a presence that hummed with malice. You know those stories of Aussie spirits, the ones old-timers talk about in hushed tones by the fire? I'd laugh them off, but out there, laughter was about as useful as an ashtray on a motorbike. It felt like a hunt, and I was the quarry, stumbling over roots, and my breath a ragged prayer. My phone beeped a low battery warning. Seriously? Now? I pushed through the bush, gripping the phone like a talisman, but even tech's cold comfort was slipping away. The hours to dawn stretched eternal, and my world shrunk to the feeble circle of my dying light. When the brush gave way to an open dirt road, it felt like a mirage. I was giddy with relief, like this was some twisted outback Wizard of Oz junk. There wasn't a yellow brick road, but I'd have kissed that dirt if I hadn't been so parched. I followed it, boots crunching, every echo a question. When the ranger station silhouetted against the night, I could have wept. The ranger, a bloke named Darrow, had the look of a man who'd seen it all and then some. He listened to my tale with a grave nod and gave me a lift back to my ute, throwing glances to the rear view like he expected my ghostly mate to be thumbing a ride. "Don't hike alone," he said, his voice almost lost in the engine's growl, "especially not when the mountain's restless." I haven't been back since. People say it was all in my head. Dehydration, panic, the bush playing tricks. And maybe they're right. But sometimes when the city's asleep and my flat's quiet, I swear I hear that whisper of a presence, feel that shiver down my spine. Sydney's got enough to explore without looking for trouble, and if you ever find yourself up in the Blue Mountains, stick to the beaten path, and for the love of all that's holy, respect the signs, both the ones in the ground and the ones in your gut, and bring a bloody flashlight. For some context, this was at the first house that I lived in, and I was around 4 or 5. Keep in mind I have a pretty overactive imagination as a kid, but this encounter felt so real and unlike anything I've experienced before. I woke up in the middle of the night in my mother's room. I forgot why I was in my mom's room, but I remember that she was sleeping and her room was lighted enough that I was able to look around the room. But when I looked towards her bedroom door, I saw 2 white figures, seemingly playing. They appeared to be young, as they seemed smaller than, say, my father, and seemed around a little older than people my age I knew. They also weren't transparent. These figures had actual mass to them, like shadow people in the best way to describe it, but instead of black, they were completely white. Now anyway, when I saw them, they stopped playing and stared right at me, and my whole body froze and I was unable to say anything. I didn't even want to wake up my mother. I was that frightened to move. Then the 2 figures started to walk to me as excruciatingly slow as possible. As they crossed to my side of the bed, one of the boys had reached his hand out to touch me and then faded away just as he reached me. It wasn't until a few years later when I brought this up with my dad, and he told me that he used to see a bunch of ghosts when he was a kid at our house. He grew up in my first house, but he never saw ghosts of 2 children. He did say that he heard a story growing up that there were 2 boys that actually died on that street that we lived in. One died falling down the stairs and the other died in some way I forgot, but he didn't know the boys personally. And that's all I got. I've told a few people this, and they brought up sleep paralysis, and I felt like I could move. I was just afraid to move in that moment. I did say that I had an overactive imagination back then, so it is entirely possible that I imagined it all, but it felt so real and unlike any night terror that I had brought up by my imagination. If you have any explanations, that would be awesome, but for now, I'll just sign off on that note. I just woke up from a nap, and I've been silently lurking and reading other people's posts, which are super interesting, and I don't necessarily think anything too much about my experience since the answer is right there. A ghost was talking to me from the basement. My parents commuted to work at the time, which required them to get up at 3 in the morning, get ready for an hour, and then leave the house at around 4 in the morning since the northern part of my state, where they work, we live in the central part, is very heavy with traffic. My parents built their house in 2013, and we moved in at around that time, too. My sister and I would sleep upstairs, and my grandma, who was alive at the time, slept in the master bedroom on the ground floor. I was in college at the time. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning, and Grandma and my sister were sleeping. I was drinking my morning coffee in the dark, looking over my student email, when I heard a very clear woman's voice say,
"Hello? Is anyone there? I need help."
from the basement. At first, I thought that I was developing psychosis since my sister has schizoaffective mood disorder, but I immediately noticed my dogs were staring right at the basement door. They heard it too. And so I barricaded the basement and went up to my room with coffee and locked the door, and now I'm perusing Reddit, trying to find answers. I moved into a rental house last year with my wife, built in the 40s, I think. It's an okay rental, but I'd never buy this place. It's a modge podge of half-assed DIYs, including a house extension. The church across the road owns it, and the 2 of the people there have managed it for a while, and I don't know much of the history of it otherwise. Even since the first time I toured it, the basement has creeped me out. There's this weird yellow half-finished bathroom downstairs in the laundry room that is at least a few decades old, a telephone down there, and the rest is unfinished. There's a creepy chair in the corner that I swear moved a few months ago, and a desk that I swear another chair used to be stacked on top of, but regardless, that's not why I'm making this post. Since we moved in, every once in a while a light is randomly on down there. Sometimes it's one of the draw cord lights, and I assume I forgot and left it on, although I'm pretty good about that kind of thing, and I doubt it. And for the past few months, more often the main light switch at the top of the stairs, and there's no way that I'd forget that. Lately, with us moving out in less than a week, it's been turning on every couple of days, which is more often than usual. I often notice it when I'm outside looking in, which is even creepier. It's worth noting that the switch will physically be up, too, when it wasn't before. But today, when it happened again, I had a creepy realization. It happens when we're sleeping. I know this because every night I go to my office down the hall from my bedroom and play games or do work in the dark. When I go into the hallway, it's always pitch black, and I have to turn on my phone flashlight. There are decent-sized gaps under the doors, and I noticed if the lights were on. The night before yesterday, I caught it again, so yesterday when we did the laundry, I made a mental note that I turned it off in the late afternoon, so it turned on after I went to bed, but before we went down there again. I also just generally get a bad vibe when I'm down there and when the door is open. A few weeks ago, I left the door open a little because my cat wandered down there while I did laundry, and I was waiting for him to come up. And I swear when I was in my office, I heard the door moving back and forth slightly and creaking, which it normally doesn't do. Nothing else weird has happened in the house on that living floor, but it generally can be very creepy. The hallway where the door to the basement is, in general, is the absolute creepiest spot. But I really want to know, what are your thoughts? It was a Friday night, and my cousin, along with her brother, was staying over at our house in Bathurst, New South Wales. My cousin was about 15 years old. We lived in a 2-story home, so my parents and her brother were downstairs in the den. My younger sister and I were in the living room, while my older cousin was in a spare bedroom getting ready for bed. I was curled up on the couch, watching TV, when suddenly a loud scream pierced the air. I jumped up and ran to the spare room to see what had happened. My cousin was sitting upright, her face pale. She told me the bed had been shaking, and thinking she was joking, I told her to stop messing around and went back to the couch. 15 minutes later, another scream rang out, even louder than before, and I rushed back to the spare room, yelling, "What's wrong now?" And with wide eyes, she said the bed was shaking. Just as I was about to walk away, the bed started moving wildly in front of us. It shook back and forth as if someone or something was gripping it. My cousin burst into tears and jumped off the bed, and the shaking stopped instantly. I checked under the bed, convinced her brother was pranking us, but it was empty. Was it a poltergeist? And to this day, I don't know if we imagined it or if it was something real. Neither my cousin nor I have talked about it since. A week later, another strange thing happened. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, and I was alone in the house reading a book. My family had gone out for dinner, and I wanted some peace and quiet. I was deeply engrossed in a suspenseful chapter when I heard faint whispers coming from the hallway. I thought that it was just the house settling or the wind outside, but the whispers grew louder and seemed to move closer. My heart pounded as I put my book down and listened more carefully. It wasn't my imagination. There were real, murmuring voices in the hallway. Summoning all my courage, I walked toward the sound. The whispers stopped the moment that I stepped into the hallway. The hairs on my neck stood up, and a chill ran through me. Over the next few days, strange things happened more frequently. Lights flickered for no reason, doors creaked open by themselves, and some rooms had inexplicable cold spots. We tried to convince ourselves that it was faulty wiring or drafts, but it happened so often that it became hard to ignore. One night, while brushing my teeth, I saw a shadowy figure in the bathroom mirror behind me. My blood ran cold, and I quickly turned around, but the room was empty. I splashed water on my face, hoping that I was just tired, but the image of that shadow haunted me. These events terrified us. My cousin and I were too frightened to sleep alone, so we started sharing a room, and our nights were filled with uneasy sleep and whispered questions like, "Did you hear that?" during the dark, quiet hours. We didn't tell our parents, afraid that they wouldn't believe us or would think that we were just causing trouble. And one night, the strange activities escalated to a peak. My family and I were in the living room trying to watch a movie, and halfway through, the lights flickered and the room became freezing. We huddled together, our breath visible in the cold air. Suddenly, the TV turned to static and whispers filled the room. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and objects began moving by themselves. Books flew off the shelves, picture frames shattered, and an old clock chimed erratically. In a panic, we ran to the den for safety, and that eerie activity followed us as if something unseen wanted us gone. In the chaos, we decided that we couldn't stay any longer, and we packed our things and left the house that night, staying at a friend's place. And leaving was hard, but it was necessary for our peace of mind. Weeks later, when we returned to collect our belongings, the house felt different. The unsettling presence seemed to have vanished, leaving a very eerie silence, and we moved out soon after, leaving behind what had once been our home, but had turned into a place of unexplained terror. And that's our story. We don't really talk about it much, but to this day we have no idea what was really going on, and sometimes I think it's just better to let these things be.
This happened about 4 years ago when I was 17, living with my aunt. For some background, my aunt, my friend, and I are all very spiritual and believe in ghosts. So anyway, I can't recall why, but I was grounded. My friend, let's call her C, wanted to come hang out around 6 p.m. She came by, and we practically begged my aunt to let me go to McDonald's with C to get a drink. After a lot of bribing with promises to clean the house, she said yes, but told us to be home in 15 minutes. So C and I hopped in her car and went to McDonald's. But of course, being 17, we took a detour on the way home and stopped in a nature strip, basically a dirt strip with some houses that led out to, well, nature. Anyway, we pulled up, opened our car doors, and turned the car off to chill and just talk. We started saying how we both felt weird, like there was a presence in the car with us, but we kind of brushed it off. At some point, my car door slammed shut, and I mean slammed, not like wind. C laughed and thought it was me until she looked at me, and I was still facing her with a shocked look on my face. C immediately freaked out, slammed her door shut, turned the car on, and booked it out of there. While we were driving out, I said that it still felt like something was with us in the car. Immediately as I said that, I screamed and said I felt a cold hand on my thigh. And as soon as I said that, the light above us on the road went out, as did about 5 more, perfectly timed as we drove under each. At this point, we were zooming home to tell my aunt. We got home and practically fell out of the car, running upstairs, but my aunt wasn't home. We sat on the balcony, collecting ourselves, and decided to go to our aunt's friend's house, who I forgot to mention was also spiritual. We'll call her S. We got back in the car, and immediately we could feel that we weren't alone again, but we decided to continue to S's house. We arrived, and I knocked on S's door, and she immediately said, "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I awkwardly laughed and said, "Something like that," and asked if she had seen my aunt. She told me that she had gone home, so I sighed, thanked her, and got back in the car. C and I looked at each other and simultaneously said, It feels like it's gone. We finally calmed down and headed back to my aunt's. She basically laughed at us and told us not to be so scared because they feed off of fear. She saged us and we went on with our night. Fast forward to the next morning. I overheard my aunt on the phone with S, and S said, "I think there's something in my house." So I'm sorry, S. I may have dropped it off.
I used to be a police officer in a city in Virginia. There is one upscale neighborhood in our city with very nice homes, and when I was a new officer, I was often told stories about a doctor who used to live in one of those homes. The story goes that the doctor attempted to perform some type of operation on himself. He numbed his stomach area to make an incision, but since he couldn't feel it, he accidentally cut too deep and wide, ultimately disemboweling himself. When officers and paramedics arrived, they found him barely alive, holding his own intestines, and he eventually died. Fast forward to when I was assigned to a call about a young woman found dead by her older sister. When I arrived on the scene, it was in the aforementioned nice neighborhood. As soon as I exited my vehicle, I had an uneasy feeling about the house. While it looked nice on the outside, there was just a bad energy surrounding it. As I approached the front porch, I noticed countless empty energy drink cans and a Ouija board on the front patio table. Everything about this house just felt wrong. And once inside, the family was obviously very distraught. I was told the deceased, whom we'll call Emily, was in the basement, and by that time another officer had arrived, so he stayed upstairs with the family while I went down to the basement. The basement was unfinished and fairly dark, with only 2 pull-string light bulbs, one on each side. The scene in the basement was similar to the front porch. Energy drink cans were scattered everywhere, and there was another Ouija board on a small coffee table. Emily, who was 19, if I remember correctly, was hanging by her neck from a basement rafter. She had used an exercise band, and her body was swinging slightly. Her face was blue, bloated, and contorted into a horrible expression. Another officer helped me take her down. Emily's family consisted of her mother, father, and older sister. Her parents said that they had been trying to help her because all she ever did was stay up all night drinking energy drinks and playing with the Ouija board. Her sister provided more detail. She said that she and Emily were very close and told each other everything, and according to her, Emily had become obsessed with the Ouija board, staying up all night to talk to what she believed was her boyfriend, who was dead. Emily had been telling her sister that her boyfriend was begging her to join him in the afterlife, which is why her sister believed she did what she did. Now let me reiterate, this house felt wrong. There was an overwhelming sense of unease and sickness in the basement, and it wasn't because of the body. This wasn't my first death scene. This call really messed with me for a while. We never got much more explanation, and as cops, you just have to move on to the next call. Not 2 weeks later to the day, I responded to a call about a car accident with ejection, and I head to the scene with lights and sirens and arrived to find a convertible BMW that had clearly experienced a horrific crash and rollover. It was sitting on its wheels, and in the driver's seat was a woman with a broken neck, her head twisted almost completely around. About 25 feet away from the car was a man who had been ejected. Since it was a convertible, he must have been thrown from the top. The top half of his head was missing and pieces of his brain matter were scattered everywhere. As I walked 75 yards away from the accident to close off the scene with yellow tape, I found yet another large chunk of his brain. Now, I'm not trying to be intentionally graphic or gross, but I want to paint a clear picture of just how violent this car accident was. When I obtained the man's ID and radioed it in to dispatch, another officer and I realized the same thing at the same time. These 2 people were Emily's parents, who had died in a terrible accident exactly 2 weeks after her death. Breaking the news to the older sister was heartbreaking. I kept in touch with her for a while. She had inherited her parents' estate and life insurance money, and she ended up selling everything and buying a new house to try and start over and build her life. However, the story doesn't end there. You see, about a month later, another officer was called to the scene after a pedestrian was struck by a car while jogging in her neighborhood. And yes, you guessed it. It was the sister. She survived several weeks in a coma, but ultimately did not make it. If you're wondering why the story about the doctor is relevant, it's because the house where Emily took her own life was the same house that doctor had lived in. I don't know what to think, but to me it seems like either the house is cursed or Emily opened up something very dark. That was a few years ago, and I'm no longer a police officer, as that's a story for a different time, and I've since moved a couple of states away. All I know is that I'm just glad to be as far away from that cursed situation as possible.
When I was a teenager, like around 13 or 14, one of my mates from school lived in a kind of countryside area. It's hard to describe. We lived in the suburbs, but his area was a little further out and less suburban looking at the time. This was 25 years ago. I have no idea what it looks like now, by the way. I went to his place to stay from time to time because there was always adventures to be had around his place. One day, he mentions that there are caves near his house, old mine shafts to be more precise. They were in a kind of national park. I was super interested to go check them out with him, so we planned to go the following weekend. And I'd stay over the night before, and we'd set out early the next morning. The weekend came around and we set out around 8 a.m. We went to the supermarket on the way to stock up on drinks and snacks and made our way to the caves. The national park was huge and beautiful. It was a great morning for a hike too. Not too hot and not too cold, with a nice blue-skied sunny day. We came to our first cave in the first 20 minutes of hiking. We grabbed our torches, or flashlights, and went in. It was only short, ending in a small chamber. At the far end of the chamber was a sturdy, locked cage-type gate. My friend told me that some were locked off due to the very real chance of cave-ins or flooding. Since it wasn't too long and it wasn't too dark, with a small amount of sunlight coming in from the entryway, we took a break and ate some snacks. It was good being out and about. I was never a fan of early mornings, but this was an exception. We resumed our trip after that short break and came across several more similar caves. There were a few longer ones with evidence of people using them for underage drinking, candles and beer cans, coupled with shitty teenage graffiti. But these were an exception and not too bad. For the most part, people seemed to respect the caves to an extent and cleaned up after themselves. After about an hour and a half, we came across one that was a bit different from the others. It was a longer one, but evidence of people using it for anything was minimal. I was too embarrassed to say so at the time, but I got a really weird feeling when we entered it. It was weird because we had been in so many, and I felt nothing. But this one just made me feel uneasy. I looked at my mate, and he seemed fine, so I didn't say anything, not wanting to appear soft. When we got to the end where the metal gate was, we found that it was unlocked and open. In fact, when we got closer, the wind seemed to blow it open slightly, although I didn't feel any wind. I got a chill up my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It was like it was inviting us in. Without hesitating, my mate was like, "Let's go." And I was a little taken aback. How could he not be picking up on the bad vibes here? But I ended up not saying anything, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid and didn't want him hassling me later about it. I regret this now. So we went in. It was so dark in there. Our flashlights barely lit a couple of meters ahead of us. The tunnels seemed to go on and on. There was zero evidence of anyone having been there recently. "What do you think we'll find?" my friend whispered to me. "Dunno," I managed to mumble out. Unease was really starting to hit me now, to the point that I was beginning to feel nauseous. And then, it got worse. I felt wind start to blow around my ankles. At first I paid it no mind, but then I thought, where is this sudden wind coming from? The temperature seemed to get colder at each step too. Then I felt the wind brush past my shoulder and face. My heart was beating so hard that I imagined it was echoing in the tunnel. Then I started hearing whispering all around me. It was faint and hard to work out the words. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. When I stopped, it too seemed to stop. And then the most bone-chilling sound I'd ever heard could be heard in the distance in front of us. Low at first, but definitely loud in no time. It was the bellowing scream of a man. One at first, but then I could make out multiple voices. I felt hands start to grab at me, and I could take it no more. I took off in a sprint back towards the exit. I could only half see the way because the hand that I was holding my flashlight with was pumping up and down as it does when you sprint. I scraped my arms, legs, and shoulders against the rough rock walls several times, but I didn't care. It felt like I was running endlessly, but eventually I reached the gate, which I collided into. I thought it would be open still, but for some reason, it was shut. In my panic, I couldn't seem to work out how to open it. Eventually I managed, and it swung towards me, and I left, my mate not far behind me. We finally got out and just kept running, until we finally realized that we were out of that tunnel. Upon realizing this, we collapsed in an exhausted heap, struggling to regain our breath. I'm not proud of this, but I also vomited on myself, due to the overexertion. It was my only shirt for that weekend too, and I had to borrow one of my mates while we cleaned mine up in secret, because for some reason we thought we'd be in trouble. Just before we got up and left the area where we collapsed, I took one look back at the cave. It was kinda involuntary. I wasn't even thinking. When my eyes landed on that cave entrance, I swear I could see a shadowy figure standing in the darkness, staring at us. I shot a look at my friend and he saw it too. I was this close to puking again, but I held it down. We got up and hurriedly left the area. That was enough adventure for one day. We went back there a year or so later for nostalgia's sake. Also, we felt bigger and tougher. That particular cave was heavily locked off with no trespassing signs on it, threatening hefty fines. Probably for the best thinking back. Teenage bravado makes young boys do stupid things sometimes, and we may not have escaped so easily a second time.